This video is going to cover the After Effects portion of the Animatics assignment. I may break sequence here and there, but for the most part I'll be covering this step by step from 7 to 16. So, I have After Effects already open, and I am going to go to File, Pull Down, Import, File. Now I'm going to actually stop that and show you another way of doing it, and I'm going to progress forward using this style of control in the interface. That's one way of doing the file import, okay? File import and then file. Or I could right click in the project bin. This is the project bin, that's my project timeline, and this is my project window or composition window. So if I right click over here in the project bin, I can get that same menu. Instead of going to the file pull down up here, I can simply go import and file. And this happens to be leading me right into my graphics import folder, but it probably won't be doing that for you. I backed up a couple folders, and you can see this is my project folder. And here's my course structure. Now what I did was I took my my stacked frames.psd and I transferred it into the graphics import folder. So that's more in line with my project directory structure. I was working on it, it's still a working asset, but now I'm actually importing it into After Effects, so taking it out of the working folder here and dropping it into the graphics import folder. This is basically a finished piece that I can actually drop in and use. So here I grab this, and under Import As, I want to go to Composition, and I want to retain the layer sizes. We already in Photoshop defined our physical size of this composition, either using 720p or 1080p, whichever you're working with. In this final version, I'm actually working in 1080p, but this will retain that size for us, and you'll see that in a moment when we look at the actual composition settings. But make sure that Import As, Composition, Retain Layer Styles, and then go ahead and hit Import. It's going to bring this window up, and here you can see that we could change this. Oh, I didn't want to do that, so maybe I want to import it as a composition. I don't want to do that, but it's an option here. Composition, Retain Layer Styles, and then by default it's going to have Editable Layer Styles. That's what we want. That way if I open up this Photoshop document and I make a change, I can simply save over that file, that Photoshop file, and that will automatically update the information into After Effects. So it's a very fluid workflow that way. So these are our settings for our import window, and I click OK. It takes a moment. What that just did is I'm going to double click on, this is my composition asset, and this is a folder it created, and you can see that these are all of the layers labeled and named, or labeled simply, or named. And I'm going to open this up, okay, to show basically everything. I can just drag and drop this over, and you can see I've got all this information. This actually tells me where it's located on my hard drive. And I could lose some of these columns if I want by hide this or pick which columns I want here. And I'm just right clicking over here to do this. I click on this top bar to get these. So I don't really like having the colors here. I don't need that in my project bin, so I'm going to hide that. I don't need the physical size of these either. That's generally irrelevant to me. So I'm going to hide that, and I like keeping my time codes here because a lot of times I'll be working with footage from different time codes and I'll need to kind of keep referencing back. I don't need to know my in and out points generally, but I can always pull them up by going to columns over here. That's just extra stuff getting in my way right now. So I'm hiding these things, these extra columns. And I'm going to simply grab this column and open it up, and you can see really I've got a long path structure here. So it's in my Z drive, in my Dropbox ASU folder, inside my classes folder, inside the GIT ground class, because that's how where I initially built this. And it's inside then my project folder, Henches, John, Animatic, and then it's also this particular layer or file is coming from the graphics import folder, stacked frames underscore aspect ratio.psd file, which is basically the PSD file that I imported. So, and then I also like having my physical size over here. So now that I have all that, I'll be opening and closing this from time to time just to get access to that additional information. But I usually kind of keep this short and closed in this, or the project bin, that way. So now I'm going to double click my composition. I'll close this out because really that's just holding all those layers. When I double click it, it'll open it up inside my composition window, and it'll also open up this composition into the timeline. And you'll notice that each of the layers of the Photoshop document are nicely ordered top to bottom here. I can toggle them off and you can start to see how that animatic will play out just like we did in Photoshop. So I'm going to turn these all back on. And also in here, these are all columns. So some of the columns I want, some of the columns I don't. I'm going to keep the defaults, but because my naming is short here, I'm just going to truncate that to give myself some extra space in the timeline. And I'm zoomed all the way out. Here's my zoom control for the timeline. This is zooming in and that's zooming out. And you can see that this is approximately, what is that? That is 2,899 frames long. Each of these layers, is just shy of 3,000 frames long, and it's 1,800 frames per minute of broadcast video. That's way too long. But that's okay. I like having extra space to work with. So I want to change the duration of each of these frames just to get it manageable. I'm not timing this out right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab frame 1. I'm going to hold shift down and I'm going to grab frame 8. You can see it selects all of these together. Actually, before that, I missed a step. If I right click on this top column area where maybe it says layer name, I usually find that it gives me the most space, because if I try to do it up here, it gets clunky. But there's some negative space in this column for parents, but I usually do it in the layer name, and I'll right click. And I get these, I could hide this column, rename it. We saw that up in the project bin. The same is true, and it operates the same down in our timeline. And in this case, actually, it gives me some new information, and I want the duration to show in this area. And now you can see that the duration for each of these layers is listed right here in frames. I'm going to grab each of these. So I grab the first frame and I hold shift, grab the last frame, frame 8. And now if I click on the duration, a window comes up and I can change the duration of each of these layers. And I just want, say, I want to make these much shorter. So I'm going to say, let's create each of these at, 30 frames per second. Let's just work with that for now. So I'm going to say each of these layers is going to be 30 frames. All right, so I'm shrinking the overall time. And I'm going to use it as the layer endpoint, which is basically here, okay? I could do it at the current frame, which would be where my marker's at over here. I'd usually want to put that at the beginning, but endpoint, or layer endpoint over here is good. And you can see that from the beginning it went 30 frames out, and it just basically trimmed these off. And I can now zoom in and get more of a managed kind of condition. And if I want to change that, I could actually click on that again. I didn't deselect my layers, Maybe I want each of these to be 3 seconds long. Well, it's 30 frames a second, so I might type in 90 here, and now each of these layers is 90 frames long or 3 seconds long. And that's probably a better starting point to work from. Now, before we go further, I want to make some changes in my composition settings. So with this comp open, there's a couple ways I can do this. I can go Composition, pull down, Composition Settings, and I'll get this window. Or I can right-click in here and go to Composition Settings. And again, I tend to do a lot of right-clicking, so I don't have to move my cursor around. It's just a healthier way of working, and it actually saves time. So you can see that it's automatically set my project to the size that each of these layers is at, which is at 1080p, 1920 by 1080. If you're working at, what was it, HDV at 720, that's what it'll load up as if you're working with 720 by 1080. Square pixels is by default. I won't talk about this, it's more of an advanced thing. But for example, if I'm using a video camera, a lot of times video footage coming from a camera is actually recorded on tape as well as digital in many cases as a rectangular pixel. It's an elongated pixel, and I'm not going to get into the engineering of why that is. You can actually Google that up, but that would be for like 3 levels beyond this class, basically. The thing I want to go in here, though, to change, all of these are perfectly set. I want non-drop time frame. Actually, what I'm going to do, yeah, I want a non-drop time frame, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change 29.97 to 30. Now, a quick reason why I'm doing that is because I'm not taking this to broadcast television. The reason why we have 29.97 is it's technically 30 frames a second, but because of the way broadcast audio or broadcast waves, I'm sorry, the way video is broadcast over the airwaves is that technology has its problems. And one of the engineering conditions to actually make it play on everyone's TV correctly through the airwaves using a antenna to capture your television station is that it has to drop a small portion of a frame to keep things in sync. So if I'm working with video footage that I've actually shot on a video camera, I'm going to leave this at 29.97. And you can see that if I go to this arrow here, I can pick different time codes here. So 29.97 for North America, 23.976 for the rest of the world, basically. We call that PAL. That would also fit in with 25 frames a second for PAL as well, but that's that's a non-broadcast standard. And I'm not going to get deeper into those standards. You'll learn those if you move further in your education with After Effects and in terms of video in general. The resolution, I'm going to keep it full. My start frame is at 0, but this is why I have so many frames in my timeline. It was set to 2,900 frames. And I'm going to just leave that for now. I can trim that at any point to clean it up, but that's going to give me plenty of space to offset each of these layers. So basically, the only reason why we came in here, other than to describe some of these settings, is to set our frame rate to 30. That's going to keep things mathematically nice and simple for us. And I click OK. Now, the thing I want to do now is I really just want to offset each of these layers. And if I hold the Shift key while I move this, it'll actually snap to the in and out points of each of these. And I could manually offset them, but I have a simpler way of working with this. In fact, I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to grab all of these frames in sequential order. So I grab it here and then go down here. I wouldn't want to go here and then grab up here for this next operation. So start with the first and go select down to the last. You could also use Control if you wanted to maybe skip a layer in there or two. You'll see this in a moment. Anyway, I grab the first frame, I grab the last frame, and under the animation pull down, I have my keyframe assistance. And everything is grayed out in there except my sequence layers. This is going to automatically lay these in for the first layer, or for the second layer, it's going to offset it to the out point of the first layer. I'm not going to describe anymore. You'll just simply see. So I'm going to simply go sequence layers. I don't want to overlap. Just leave these at defaults, no overlap. And I click OK. So you can see that that is automatically offset these so that where one ends, the other begins. And I can scroll through this and you can see basically the whole animatic as it flows through this composition. I can scroll out. There's my overall timeline, and here's how it's been sequenced. Here's what happens if you don't do that. I'm going to just simply undo that operation. If I say grab it from 8, holding shift and grab 1, I grabbed it in reverse order, and now when I go sequence, keyframe assistance and sequence, I don't want to overlap. That would allow you to specify a certain amount of frames that you want each of these layers to overlap with each other, but I don't want that. But I grab these in reverse order, and it's going to sequence them in reverse order. Now there are applications where I'm going to want to be able to do that, but that's not the case in this particular exercise. So I grab them front to, top to bottom in this case, animation sequence, no overlap, I click OK, and I've got these all nicely laid out. Now these timings are generic. I just set them over here, with my durations column, and I then offset them accordingly. That's a close enough proximity to get our timing going to some degree. The next step is what we're going to do is we're going to actually grab audio clips, and we're going to use audio to derive our timings. So, but before I do this, I'm sitting here with a sketchbook, and I'm going to scroll through this. And as I scroll through, I'm going to be thinking about the audio that I'm going to want to play during each of these clips. So here, basically what's happening is I have a volcano that's starting to smolder. And I'm thinking through this and I'm going, okay, well, what happens overall when a volcano erupts? Well, generally, the first thing that happens is an earthquake will actually happen. So the ground's going to rumble. It's going to be a different sound than the volcano actually erupting. So in my sketchbook, I'm just making a note here that, I'm going to want an earthquake sound. Then the earthquake starts, and then we get into the explosion. So I might have the earthquake start in this range of timing, but right here, I need an explosion of a volcano sound. And that's going to vary, but I'm making that as a note in my sketchbook here. So I'm going to go from earthquake sound to volcano sound. And there's nothing really else happening here. But then the explosion ends and the rubble starts coming down. So I'm thinking, well, as rubble travels through the air, it's going to make a certain sound. Now, what that sound is, I'm not entirely sure. So I'm going to, again, in my sketchbook, I am simply writing down different ideas of what that sound might be. It might just simply be a soft whistle, like a kind of thing. Or it might be more of a sound like this. Shh. Those are arbitrary. Again, I'm in a brainstorming mode, so I'm not saying, oh, that's a dumb sound. I'm just saying, well, maybe that's a good sound to work with. And I'm moving on to the next idea. So I need a sound for the rocks flying through the air, but also they're starting to hit the ground. So now I need another sound for the rocks hitting the ground, a pitter-pat, like something like that. As I scroll forward, this next frame, I start to see the actual vehicle enter the frame. Now the vehicle is traveling through air, and when something travels through air, it makes a sound. Now what is that sound? I don't know. I'm going to think it is something along the lines of if you've ever held your hand out of a car window as it's traveling, there's a certain sound that comes from that. So I'm just going to put that as hand out of car sound in my sketchbook. And I might come up with several other ideas for that. Maybe swinging a broom in the air sound, or whatever it might be. And as I move forward, then I think that's all the sounds that I'll need for this in this frame. Here, I have, I'm hitting, or the car's hitting the ground. So here I need some kind of collision sound that's going to have rubber and metal. What does a car sound like when it lands on something? Something flat for the most part. Well, there's going to be some metallic sounds. There's going to be some sounds of the tires compressing. There's a little bit of air sound still, because all of these sounds are overlapping with each other. There's going to be a sound of the dirt moving. There's the displacement with dirt as the tires make an impact with the ground. So that I'm going to call that a thud of one sort or another. Again, I'm writing all of these ideas down in my sketchbook as I'm kind of scrolling through this. So there's a thud. You can also see at this point I also have these rocks are still falling. There might even be a low rumble of the volcano going on in the background yet. It's not a major noise, but it's a kind of a background effect noise that I may want to keep in this frame. So here it goes from steaming hot to kind of squeaky clean. So it's kind of like this idea of the phoenix born from the fire. And that's the idea of this commercial. So the Jeep was born of the earth through a very violent occurrence. And in this particular case, when it transitions from steaming hot to nothingness, well, there's a transition that I might want to think of an effect. What does that effect sound like? I don't know. Maybe it's the sound of a steak coming off the grill. Or maybe it's a steak that's being placed on the grill, a sizzle of sorts. But I want to do a reverse sizzle, not a steak being put on, but a steak being maybe reversing that audio clip. All of these things, all of these ideas I'm putting in my sketchbook. I'm moving forward. Here, in this case, well, the general idea is that this car is going to be driving away. Okay, it's been reborn, and now it's going to start driving away, and the commercial is going to end. So here, if the car's going to drive away, it needs to start first. So I need an ignition start. I need an engine, maybe a rev in there, or certainly a hum. Then, when I shift it into gear, it's going to start driving. And a driving noise is very different from an engine start or an engine in idle. Even a rev state of the engine is different. So here, the car is starting to drive away, and I need an audio clip of a car driving away from me. Now, for those that aren't familiar with this condition, this is called the Doppler effect. When when a car comes close to you or passes you on the road, it approaches, and the sound, there's an approach sound, then there's a different sound as it is right next to you, passing you, and then as it leaves you, there's a different sound. We hear this sound with sirens. The siren sounds different as the siren approaches you. The siren is very loud and in your face right as the siren is in your general proximity. And then as the siren starts to go away from itself, there's a third sound, and that's called the Doppler effect. So I need some kind of Doppler effect or a car driving away sound in this, and it needs to extend all the way through my final frame of my clip. So I've documented all of these audio sounds in my sketchbook, and now I'm going to jump online. I'm going to go find some audio clips to work with. So to start off with, I'm going to start with Google, and I'm going to go, okay, well, I said I need an earthquake sound. Earthquake audio, or actually I'll even get more specific. Sound effect. There we go. Now, I could pull up this video here and I'm getting this earthquake sound effect. But the problem is this sound effect is in a video. So I would have to bring this in a generic or new project in After Effects and strip out, or Premiere for that matter, and strip out the audio. Now, or maybe I want to record this audio on my phone. So maybe I put the audio next to my speakers, or my phone next to my speakers, and record the audio that way. For an Animatic, that's fine. But the idea is that if I can grab these sound effects with as a final sound effect for my finished project, I'm saving myself some time. So I don't really want to work with these video clips and pull off audio from there. As I scroll down, I'm like, oh, here's a website with free sounds. What do we have here? Here's another one. There's another one. So I could pick a number of these. Now, there's one in particular that I find works for me, and that happens to be sounddogs.com. Now, some of this is paid, a lot of this is paid content, and you can see the pricing over here. You can actually sort through various pricing options. But I found a little trick. Under the previews, I don't need a whole lot, and this isn't, final stuff, but in certain clips you can preview these. So in this case I did a search for volcanoes, and I right-click on the MP3 part of it, and I open it in a new tab. And here it's actually playing that volcano sound. Now, if I hold the cursor over, I can quickly browse through each of these sounds. Here's one with rubble and crackle. That's a large volcano erupting. So that's a preview, but if I right-click on any of these MP3s, I can open it up in this new window, and I can simply right-click on the timeline here for this audio clip, save audio as. Now that's a cryptic .mp3 name, so I'm going to go back, and that happened to be, I don't know, I'm going to do this a little bit more organized, but volcano, let's see here. I will go rumble, volcano, crackle. So I'm going to call this volcano crackle. Go to the MP3, open a new tab. Yep, that's the one I want. So right click, save audio, and I'm going to name it as I save it. And I'll just call this volcano crackle. And this time I am going to save it in my project directory. in the audio import. And you can see I've already done that with a lot of these sounds. So go ahead and download a bunch of audio clips. They don't always, don't limit yourself. Don't just pick one sound for the sound you're looking for. Grab 4 or 5 sounds. If you need footsteps, grab 4 or 5 different sounds for that footstep, because you might want to swap out one sound for another when you're in After Effects. So that's basically how to grab sound. There are many other sites that you can grab free sounds from. So I did a volcano effects search here, but I could add free to that and work accordingly. So that being what it is, I've already done that. And let's see here. Let me get back into my project directory. These are all of the audio clips that I've downloaded for my project. And I can click on them, and they're going to open up in your audio player for your computer. And I'm going to evaluate each one of these. Okay, and now that I have all these clips that I've downloaded, I want to import them into After Effects. Now, there's different ways of doing this. I could do them one at a time, but if I can just drag and drop them all in at the same time, I'm going to do that. And that's my next step. So, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Audio. Actually, I'm going to call this Audio Effects. And I'm going to make a new folder called Audio Narration. This might be, I might record some narration using my phone or a microphone attached to my computer, a webcam microphone, and I want to separate the two for easy navigation and just file organization. You don't have to do that, but it's just an idea. So there's my audio narration, there's my audio effects clips, and now I'm going to simply grab all of these minus what? This was an audio narration that I created. So all of these except for the audio narration, and I'm going to drop them into the audio effects folder that I just created. That's going to take a moment. I'm going to minimize that, and now I'm going to drop in my narration into the narration folder. So this one clip is what I have so far. I'm going to drop that in there. So I've got all these audio clips, and I'm going to basically run through the process again, zoom in a little bit. So I know that I need, at this location, starting off, I need an earthquake. So let's see here. I can double click it and play. I like the way that rolls in. I might play a few more and test them out, but I'm simply going to drop it right at the beginning here. And you can see this is a very long audio clip. I'll trim it in a moment. But okay, so now that I have the audio clip, in addition to the audio clip, when I get to this point over here, now this is an arbitrary timing, I need an explosion. So where's my explosion? Well, here's a volcano. Let's see, what is this doing? That's the one I want. So I'm going to drop that in just below my quake. So what I want to happen here is I want the earthquake to happen, and then I want the volcano to happen at some point. So let's see here. And I'm just going to get a feel for this. I'm going to play it, and see how it wants generically. I'm like, okay, that's enough. Probably about 2 seconds, 3 seconds of earthquake before I get the volcano to happen. So right about there, I think I want it to explode. And I just got a feel for it. I want things to happen relatively quickly, as quick as possible. So now I'm going to put my volcano clips starting right about here. And I'm going to trim, let's see here, let's see how this plays out first. There we go. So we start, and you can see my audio timings are different than the frame timings. I'm not even worried about my frame timings right now. So I'm just getting a feel using the audio for my timing. Not bad. I think that's happiness. So right where I think I have to determine where in the audio clip the explosion happens. And to help me do that, I'm going to open up the arrow, the timeline arrows, to get the waveform. I can see how that waveform starts to build up over here. So let's see here. As I do this, it's right in here that it's happening. And that's pretty close to my frame timing as it turns out. So a couple more passes on adjustments. I might shift it over a frame or two. And then I might truncate this a frame or two and extend this other one in terms of this other one being my frame 2 up here. Let's see if that syncs up well with my audio. Yeah, it gives an initial explosion that I can't see. Part of the mountain is occluding the initial part of the explosion. It's coming deep from within the mountain. And I'm getting the audio that helps mimic that. So I think I like my timings there. And I can then close out the waveform for that. So what's happening next? Well, here it actually starts to, the audio gets a little bit rougher in this area. I like how that's happening because that's adding to the notion that the rumble's happening here. But part of the problem here is that the explosion is ending in the frame. So right around here, I'm going to set an audio level keyframe, and that's at 0 dB. So it's playing, and right as it gets here, approximately, maybe down to, say, here, just a little overlap, I'm now going to bring that audio down so that the waveform is flat. So let's see what happens with that adjustment. The audio here is 100%, and it goes to nothing here. I'm just taking the audio level down. Notice I still have the earthquake rumble going on in the background. I can play with the audio levels for that, but it's too early to be working with that at this point. And I think that's pretty good. The last part of this, though, I want to show you is one more clip. So now I have the rocks coming in, and I need a couple sounds. Rocks falling, that's an audio clip that I picked, so here's the rocks. I'm going to drop that into my timeline. I'm going to offset it, and I might even open up the waveform to get a better idea of where I want that positioned. So I'm going to move my cursor here. Now I always like having my audio lead the visual. So notice how the audio for the rocks falling, oh, wrong key here, the audio is going to start before the new frame happens. And perceptually, your audience is going to buy into that. So let me run through this part, or from the beginning. All right, so I get these rocks falling, and that's going to happen relatively quick. I don't want to waste my audience's time by watching rocks fall, so this clip doesn't need to be this long. So I'm going to actually bring it, say, over to here, and I'm going to trim this visual up to there. I'm then going to grab all these others. Let me zoom out. I'm going to grab these 4 clips. Do it this way. And holding Shift, and let me zoom in for a little bit more accuracy. I can snap it to the end there. So here we can play this back. And then I need some extra audio clips. And I'm going to do this process using my audio clips to create my timing throughout this whole application. So let me open up the final version of this to save some time. And here you can see how I've truncated the timings and added a few other elements, the Jeep logo, some other audio clips that I created. And I'm going to open this up so you can see all of the audio clips. All right, so these are, you can also see the trimming I've done on these audio clips. And I'm going to play the whole thing now from start to finish so you can get a better idea of how I use the audio clips to generate my timing for this overall animatic.
Jeep. I live, I ride, I am.
I know I have the worst voiceover abilities ever. Usually I will add a lot of bass into my voice for clips that I use actually in commercial applications. Moving on. So that's how you need to work with your animatic. Now, in this case, it's all done. If you give me this, you're going to get an A. If I quickly go over to my folder, I'm going to move these outside of my folder. I'm then going to take this project and zip it up and submit it. And going back into our assignment, that covers the After Effects portion here. Now these are just kind of bullet points of what I've covered in the video. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to submit it. So that is your animatic lesson for this module. Good luck.